The sermon today is in the style, I've attempted to do this in the style of Tamil storytelling, which is a very rich oral tradition. People talk super fast when they're talking Tamil. I won't be replicating that. It's a rich oral tradition of seemingly random thoughts where in one moment it feels like you're in the rapids of a stream of consciousness, and the next moment, still waters, deep with secrets not yet forgotten and not ready to be spoken. It can be difficult to follow at times, but each turn hopefully offers some insight into our shared stories and history. So if at the end of the sermon you feel a bit of whiplash, I know the feeling, and welcome to the family. The shirt I'm wearing today is in Tamil. These are a collection of sayings on ethics, political and economic matters, and on love. The title of the collection of sayings is Thirukkural. It's written by a Tamil poet and philosopher, Thiruvalluvar, who is commonly known Valluvar. It's said that some of his writings are as early as 300 BCE. Most scholars say it was probably right around 100 CE. So old. And one of the things that was really fascinating that I did not know about the Tamil language, which our older son Julian, who studied linguistics at UC Davis, told me that Tamil is the oldest continuously spoken language in the world, meaning that Tamil speakers today could fully converse with Tamil speakers from this era and understand each other. So the meanings, the language hasn't changed in all that time. It has had a string of life that has been unbroken. And that blew me away, and I guess I wasn't all that surprised because we've kind of been around that part of the world forever. The original human inhabitants. Now, a couple of well-known quotes from this work, this collection, are roughly translated in English, are quite beautiful. One is, "The roof of peace rests upon the walls of understanding." And another is, "Wealth that deprives us of love and compassion should be avoided." Now today, I'm going to be sharing some specific things about my family, some deeply personal moments, and my intention is not for this to remain a show and tell, but for this time together to be an invitation for you to share your family stories as well. And in our retelling, we relive and reconnect. And one of the hopes that I carry with this idea of story sharing is the more we do it, the more we become part of one another's stories. The more we become part of one another's families. Prakasapuram is a tiny village. You see the red dot up there? Tiny, tiny village in the southernmost state of southern India. And you saw on that beautiful song different faces of India from all over. It's a diverse country. We do not all look or sound or eat the same. And just off the southernmost tip of India is Kanyakumari. So if you kind of follow that coastline literally all the way down to the southern tip is this place called Kanyakumari, a holy place where 3 seas meet: the Indian Ocean, the Bay of Bengal, and the Arabian Sea. The surf here is very dangerous. You really don't go swimming on these beaches. You might go wading. And I used to go on trips when we were young, getting to visit India. This is the part of the world where we stayed. And in these sacred waters, you can see those 3 colors of sea coming together. You can see the different levels of current coming together to form this new body of water. And in these sacred waters, a very large rock just off the coast is a large statue of Thiruvalluvar, the author of this. I mean, it's a huge statue. So in this next picture, you see the little red outline there. That is Prakasapuram. That little red outline is barely a square mile. It's a tiny place. It's an arid valley surrounded by very lush green hills. And my grandmother, her name was Ranjitham. This is my mom's mom. My grandmother's family has lived in Prakasapuram for generations. Possibly descendant from the very first humans that inhabited that place. You know, travel in this part of the world, when you've been in a place for so long, you're not going anywhere in a hurry. Especially when the food falls from trees, practically jumps out of streams. Don't have to go very far. Transportation has always been slow, and one of my uncles, Sundar Mama means the brother of a sister or the sister of a brother. You see, different gender siblings who are uncles or aunts are mama and ate. Same gender sibling uncles and aunts, if older, is Periama and Periapa, literally meaning big mother, big father. Younger, Chithi and Chithapa, literally meaning little mother, little father. And I have 5 mamas and ates, 1 Perima and Peripa. And unlike Vice President Kamala Harris, I have no Chithis or Chithapas. See, her mom is Tamil too. Now, this seemingly complex system of uncles and aunties was developed from an indigenous understanding around genetics. In Indian tradition, it's okay to marry a first cousin if that first cousin is the child of a mama or an ate. You cannot marry a first cousin whose parent is the same gender as your related parent. Somewhere along the line, they figured out that would be a genetic disaster. Right, we don't do that here. And this is a picture of my mom and my Perima, Alice. So that's Glory on the left and Alice on the right. This picture was taken at the time of my niece's dedication, which in our Christian tradition, we do baptisms. In the Seventh-day Adventist, in the Tamil tradition, we do baby dedications. So the whole family showed up there to coastal Oregon for this. Back to some transportation being slow in Prakasapuram. My Sundar Mama tells of a story that happened frequently. He rode what he calls the original GPS, a bullock cart. And this is actually a pretty current picture. This mode of transportation hasn't changed a whole lot for a very long time, and is still really effective, because in areas where the roads aren't great and seasonal storms change terrain, having one of these buggies is the way to go. But Sundar Mama said he would sometimes wake up very early before sunrise, hop on the bullock cart, and fall asleep. He'd wake up, he was at school. And in the evening, he would hop back on the bullock cart or someone's bullock cart who was headed back to Prakasapuram. They would end up back home. The original GPS. He said the only time things would go wrong is if you put the wrong animal on the wrong side. Then it got a little chaotic. You know, Prakasapuram and the surrounding villages hold a unique history that is steeped, and this is kind of surprising to most people, but is steeped in Hebrew traditions of the Mosaic and Levitical laws. The names of some of the family groups are quite indicative. My mother's family's name is Moses. We're related to the Isaacs, the Abrahams, and the Solomons, all from this area that go way back. The family stories say that we've had the Hebrew scriptures in Tamil for a long time, and the historical record indicates the first translation seemed to happen in 1706, thanks to a German missionary, Bartholomew Ziegenbalg. But practice says they were doing those rituals before the text ever showed up. Very little academic or concrete historical evidence to back up the oral tradition. But when you've been telling the same stories for a time, there's probably some real truth there. Now, these Mosaic and Levitical laws were held to very strictly, and I believe to some degree still today, and my mom would tell stories, that there was this hut removed from everyone else so that when women were menstruating, they went to the hut. Another thing that got really close to home as I was growing up is various dietary laws were followed very, very strictly. So what we might call kosher was no negotiating. That's how it worked. And on our trips to India, we learned that the tradition of butchering meat had been passed down. And so when we would go there, we would stay with my eldest uncle, who was also a minister. And he practiced these ancient techniques. As the eldest in the family, he not only was a priest or a minister to the community, he held that role for the family as the firstborn son. So he carried that tradition of butchering. So when we were kids and we were visiting, all of us were instructed to go and watch John Mama butcher the animals that we were going to eat later. And so we would surround him. There was always prayer, a real sense of solemnity and reverence, and he held whatever animal was being readied for the meal, whether it was chicken, goat, lamb, fish, and he would make the first cut. We would always stand and observe. We were not allowed to leave. Now, part of the ritual was to be sure that all the blood from the animal was drained, because it was a sin to hastily butcher life. And blood is the life force that does not belong to us. It belongs to God. So for us Tamils, particularly us Tamils from Prakasapuram, communion takes on a sacred meaning because of this connection. Another deep connection to the Hebrew observances is Sabbath, Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. Through the layers of family interviews and some research on my own, if you've ever tried to interview older family members, you know it's not always easy to get the information you're hoping for. Most of the time, things are just, let's move on. Let's deal with today. But I learned that this Sabbath observance had happened for many, many years. And I came across some really powerful information that the practice of Sabbath observance by these people in Prakasapuram and surrounding villages came to become an anti-colonial practice. So a gentleman named A.N. Sachampillai, he decided, and this was in the early 1800s, he decided that we're going to lift up Saturday worship in contrast to the colonial occupiers. And we're going to treat Jesus as a holy teacher, not as God. Because they didn't want to treat Jesus as a God made in the image of the Anglo-occupiers. So as time went, Tata Sachampillai learned that there were Christians somewhere in the world who also worshiped on Saturday. It happened to be the Seventh-day Baptists. So he sent a letter to the World Parliament of Religions in the hopes of getting the letter to the Seventh-day Baptists. But the letter got forwarded to Battle Creek, Michigan, which was then the headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So in Battle Creek, a Mr. Wilcox began to correspond with Mr. Satyan Pillai, and in 1908, Seventh-day Adventist missionaries arrived in Prakasapuram and neighboring village of Nazareth. Neighboring village of Nazareth. He arrived by Bullockot. Here's a picture from some Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist history stuff. To the far left, these are the original workers that made it to Prakasapuram and Nazareth. In the middle is the first Seventh-day Adventist church built in India, right there in Prakasapuram. It's still standing. I have worshiped in that church more than once. And my grandmother's family were among the first 50 converts. The building on the right is the regional headquarters, which is in northern India. Now, this move that my family made to be part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church was considered a betrayal by some in the community. You see, the indigenous practice of keeping Sabbath as a sign of resistance to British occupation and brutality itself was now being colonized by Western forces. When you live in a tight-knit community where your survival depends on sharing, it's tough to make a break like this. But they did. And my grandmother, as life went on, she got married pretty young. From the stories I hear, my grandfather died very early after they had 7 children, but they were tiny. The younger ones, I believe the youngest was about 2. So here she was as a widow who never got remarried. She wore a white sari from then on, which is a visible sign of widowhood. She moved in the world as an incomplete human being because her personhood was her husband, and now he was no longer there. She never re-entered a church because she couldn't. When her own children got married, she watched from the window. Now, it's unclear how much of this was demanded externally and how much of this my grandmother fully internalized and did out of a practice and devotion to the local heritage. We never got to talk about that because I only have a few memories of my grandmother Ranjadam. Many of you know that my nuclear family immigrated to the United States right about when I turned 2. So I only got to see her for a while. My first memory of seeing her was at the end of my 2nd grade year. We emigrated to the United States, as I said, so we didn't get to go back to India very often because we were just trying to make ends meet here. But she got Parkinson's. And so the siblings, all but John Mama, the elder who was the minister, all but he moved to the United States. So my grandma lived with him, and siblings would take turns going home to provide support to John Mama and help care for grandma. So the end of my 2nd grade year, it was a chance for us to go, take our turn. My brother was about 3 years old at the time, and it was a chance for us to reconnect with them and get to know my cousins who lived in that home. But by the time of our visit, Grandma needed help to do anything. And her tremors were unceasing, ranged from mild to pretty wild. Medications weren't really available to control some of these things at the time. So she lived for quite a few more years with this worsening condition. Now, me and my brother and the 2 cousins that lived at home at the time, We were young, we were energetic, and we were mischievous. We would get smacked with sticks all the time because that was the discipline, because nobody had time to like meet with you, have a conversation, explain why you were about to get beat, then get the beating, get hugged afterwards. There was motion. People were cooking, people were cleaning. You grab something, whack, stop it, don't do it again, life goes on. But if you got in really big trouble, you would have to go and see Pati. That's the word for grandma. Tata means grandpa. And I distinctly remember one time, I was getting scolded by my mom. And in the middle of her scolding, she just ended it. And I thought, oh no, I'm going to go and see Pati now, I think. So my mom says, wait right here. I was so nervous. I remember this. I was so nervous. I ran to the bathroom real quick, came back to my spot, and then my mom said, okay, come on, you're going to go see Pati. The rest of my cousins froze for a second, waiting if their names would be called or not, but they weren't, so they all breathed a sigh of relief. So I walked in to the main room of the house, which was Pati's room. Her bed was in the middle of the room. It was the middle of the day, so it was dark because the windows and doors are shuttered to keep the heat of the afternoon outside. And she was laying down in her white sari, looking at the ceiling. As soon as I stepped in, her head just moved in my direction. Oh, man. The shivers. I don't remember what she said, but I do remember how I felt. See, I was in the presence of someone who gave all of us life. And it felt like she had the power to suck that life right out of us. You know, and I think my punishment was to apologize to my cousins because I'd said something mean. And one of the typical punishments is you kneel on the floor with your hands behind your back and you just balance. It's a great core strengthening exercise if you want to try it. But I think back on that moment a lot because it was just me and her. And that memory has transformed into a shrine of sorts. A place where I go and say prayers to and with Pati. This single mom, widowed, with young children, 7 in total, in rural India. She somehow managed to get all of them through college and then have 17 grandchildren, 2 of whom are pastors, 2 teachers, 1 restaurateur, 7 healthcare professionals, 2 corporate managers, 1 in international finance, 1 social worker, and 1 wanderer. And it's in this shrine of that memory with my Pati where I first understood the deeper meaning of the phrase fear and trembling. It's a recognition of being in the presence of spiritual power that results in an inescapable moment of reverence, physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual reverence. See, in this shrine, the stories of her toughness and dogmatic devotion to her God and her children would begin to come into focus as supreme acts of love. In this shrine is where I've really spent the most time with her. And she will share her softer side, her fears, her anxieties and regrets, and her deep love for all of us. And here's a picture of the all of us at a recent a family reunion a few years ago. This is a picture of the Moses family. And most of us, when we say immediate family, this is the image that comes to mind. It's not just me, my spouse, and my children, or my mom, dad, and brother. This is immediate family to us. On the couch is my mom in the blue scarf. Next to her are 4 siblings and a sister-in-law. The far right on that bench is Iji Mama. He was the second eldest in the family, but the patriarch of us in the United States, the eldest. He was a professor of psychology at Howard University, and he died a couple of years ago after a long battle with cancer. And my mother, Glory, is through and through Ranjitham's daughter. See, I grew up watching my mother pray, kneeling by the side of her bed every night, praying out loud. She prayed for all of us, many times as a kid. And now when they come and visit and stay with us. In those moments where I'm just not feeling sure about things, nervous about something that's around the corner, I know the time when she prays. And I did this as a kid, and I do this now. I stand outside the bedroom door and listen and pray along. See, the directive in our scripture today that Jean read for us in Luke chapter 12, verses 35 to 40, to be ready at all times was taken extremely seriously by my Pati and by Amma. See, that perpetual readiness made possible the lives that me and my 17 cousins now live. And there's something about generational devotion, this thing that gets passed down. Generational devotion kind of gives birth to a strange kind of familiarity and connection with stories and people, characters that often result in singular moments that are deeply personal, contextual, and eternal. In Indian culture, we cast a very wide net with our use of language around family. A primary example is the English words uncle and auntie. If you're somewhere, anywhere with a peer group and there's an older person in the crowd, they're uncle or auntie. That's it. You probably don't even know their name. They're just uncle or auntie. You might see them time after time after time, not know their name, but they're uncle or auntie. So in the spirit of this next picture is of Kadai Tata. Now, I don't know who this is, but this is a fairly recent picture of a little shop in Prakasapuram. Now, Kadai means store, and Tata means grandpa. This is how he's known in the village. And the traditional outfit, my brother and I used to wear these when we were kids, till we just couldn't keep them on anymore. The lungi around the waist, super cool, airy, and the scarf. The scarf is doesn't cover a whole lot, but it's there to dab sweat, to wipe off your face. Now, in this shrine with Pati, I've had conversations with her about taking a path that is different than hers, probably quite different than what she wished for me. And I've told her that in spite of this slight deviation, that my path largely runs parallel to hers and that it's close enough that most times we can reach out and still hold hands. And that slight turn of deviation isn't about devotion to family or faith, but around this idea of preparedness. If you look through the scriptures, preparedness is all over it. And Pati held and passed down a practice of preparedness that had a fixed, singular outcome in mind. And if that didn't materialize, you weren't prepared. My particular divergence is one where I work on my preparation, including being ready to accept what I didn't expect. Ultimately, one spirit-led life isn't going to look like another one. No matter what we initially think about another one's path, patient reflection often confirms points of divergence indeed, but will also reveal that our paths come close enough, often enough, that we can reach out and hold hands most of the way. Amen.